Hey everybody, I'm Josh Long. I'm a middle-aged journalist who needs to exercise more and eat a healthier diet, but I guess I digress. What am I talking about today? Food and Drug Administration. We have two former FDA officials, Bob Durkin, partner and co-chair of the Food and Drug Practice at Arnell Golden Gregory, and Dan Fabricant, president and CEO of the Natural Products Association. Come on up, gentlemen.
Howdy, Josh.
Hey guys. So we're going to talk about, in 30 minutes, FDA and supplements, and we're going to solve all the world's problems in that time. First question, we'll go to Bob here. 3 adjectives to describe the Food and Drug Administration as it relates to supplements.
Adjectives, are they the words that end in ly? Which ones are they?
You'll figure it out.
Confused, regressive, befuddling.
Dan?
Deliberate, hostile. I'm just going with 2.
You said befuddled. In 20 seconds, why befuddled?
I feel befuddled. I think
Right.
that they're putting out a confusing message. We just had the commissioner, you wrote about it. We had the Deputy Commissioner Jones, you wrote about this. Convey a misconception about structure function claims. Convey a misconception about, one of the commissioners, I forget which one, said consumers deserve to know what's in the bottle. What's in the bottle should be on the label. These are fundamental principles of dietary supplements and how they've been regulated since 1994. The fact that a commissioner and the deputy commissioner for foods or associate commissioner for foods said these things, that's troubling, that's befuddling. How could leadership not understand how dietary supplements, the basics of dietary supplement regulation?
Thank you. Dan, you said hostile, I believe. Go on.
Well, I think deliberately hostile. I credit Bob for giving the agency the benefit of the doubt. I don't think these things are coincidental. I think there's a pattern and practice of behavior here where the agency keeps wanting to kind of shove the industry down a peg, which I think from someone like Dr. Califf's perspective, as he said, he's a doctor, doesn't really believe in supplements, doesn't really take supplements. So I think there's a lot of that kind of old school medical school mindset where it's like, hey, don't use these, and it's creating a real problem.
Bob, you already mentioned that the two of the top FDA officials have expressed concerns about claims. Now, I guess from my standpoint, if you're going to criticize the dietary supplement industry, I'm not sure I'd start with claims. Any thoughts there in terms of why they're focused on claims specifically?
Those are easy actions for the agency to take. It's an easy warning letter to write. It's easy. It's something that's easy to point to. Other things take more work. They take more effort. GMP inspection, tests, lab analysis. When you want to go after somebody for making a bad claim, all you do is tell them what their claim is. Take a copy it off their website or their label, and you can move forward with a disease claim charge, an unapproved new drug charge. Now, they do have a good basis for this. They feel that people are going to maybe not go to their doctor if they choose to take a dietary supplement. But, Dr. Califf supports a healthy prostate. That shouldn't be concerning to someone. I mean, it's pretty obvious what supports a healthy prostate means, but yet that's the type of claim that he chose to pull out for an example.
Yeah, I think it's just intellectually dishonest to say, hey, we're FDA and we don't know how to call balls and strikes on claims, when the bulk of their enforcement work against the industry has been calling balls and strikes on claims. I mean, that's what we see. So I think that spreading that message and going, hey, the claims are confusing to the agency. They may be confusing to Dr. Califf, but I think there's someone at the agency who understands if a claim's in bounds or out of bounds.
So is your third adjective befuddling as well?
No, I think that's deliberate. I think, I do. I think that's deliberate. I think it's hostile.
Okay. Let's move on to reorg. FDA is going through a major reorg in its food programs, human food programs. As part of the reorg, they have proposed a Office of Food Chemical Safety, Dietary Supplements and Innovation. We currently have an Office of Dietary Supplement Programs, which industry aggressively lobbied for to elevate the Division of Dietary Supplement Programs, which you ran, to an office so the agency would have more resources. A lot of concerns have been expressed that this office might not be great for the commodity. Bob, let's start with you.
It's part of the regression. It's almost, the late 80s, early 90s again. They're moving dietary supplements back with food additives. Now they're calling food additives chemicals. And it just worries me that they're supposed to be regulated differently. Science is science. A basis for safety for a chemical or a food ingredient or a food substance, it's the same science that you use for a dietary ingredient or a dietary supplement. It's the standard of review. A food additive or a GRAS substance is a reasonable certainty of no harm, where a dietary ingredient or a dietary supplement generally is a reasonable expectation of safety. I don't think the agency since '94, or certainly recently, has done a good job in understanding the difference between those two. I don't even think they have a definition of that. But here, moving forward, we're going to go back and put the folks that regulate dietary supplements in the same office with people that now regulate chemicals. And that's kind of concerning, because I don't know that the divide was ever fully established to begin with. And plus, with Dr. Jones coming in, I mean, he came from the EPA where they regulated chemicals that are different than the chemicals the FDA is going to hopefully regulate.
You have concerns or not?
Huge, and it's not done yet. It's a proposal. So Congress still has a voice in this, and there's some members of Congress that I don't think are too keen on giving FDA new authorities, new powers, new structure. My concern, I certainly share Bob's concern, that's a big one, that whole food additive treatment. The one no one's talking about that's more trouble is rolling up ORA. What does that do to a dedicated dietary supplement GMP inspectorate? I think that wipes it out. I mean, that was a big push in 2016 of getting the offices. We'd have that inspectorate. We'd have folks who are trained in supplements inspections, which is, it's not an easy inspection pattern.
No,
yeah.
And it was always a counterbalance too, where you had the folks at the center with their priorities and their thoughts about how you should move forward. And then you had the folks in the field in the Office of Regulatory Affairs, ORA, the inspectors. And they had a lot of input about the way the agency went and what direction they went. They prioritized investigations and inspections, but now you're going to have them back under the same leadership, where I always thought there was a value to that checks and balance.
But just to step back, though, the whole purpose of the Human Foods reorganization is, the Reagan-Udall Foundation report came out in the wake of criticism over the infant formula fiasco and other missteps by the agency as it relates to, responding in a swift manner to food outbreaks and so forth. They want to be more effective. They want to more effectively communicate with the different parts of the agency so they can be more responsive to a health crisis, so to speak. Would you agree that, that's the goal and of this whole reorg?
It was FDA's function from the start. I don't know if it's the goal of the reorg, and I don't know if it's going to make that more efficient or quicker. I know that, I worked in crisis management, the Office of Crisis Management, for 2 years as a manager. And my job there was, when an FDA-regulated commodity was hurting somebody, help to move the pieces on the board to get that product off the market quickly. When FDA identifies a hazard, phone calls can happen, emails can happen from the right level, from office to office, from director to director, to make that happen. So I'm not sure how this is going to make that any better, any quicker.
You think the reorg will have a meaningful difference?
No, it's moving deck chairs on the Titanic. It's a culture shift that needs to happen at FDA. The culture is the issue there. And that's what Reagan-Udall found, that the culture was really the problem. So, they highlighted that they're non-responsive to industry, they're non-responsive to Congress, and now they're non-responsive to the consumer. That's the problem.
All right, and just in 30 seconds, Reagan-Udall Foundation report took a hard look at food. Supplements are a subset of food. We all know, well, the three of us know anyways, that they didn't look at supplements. What do you make of that, if anything?
I don't know what to make of it, but yet ODSP got sucked up in the reorg that looked at everything but supplements. So it's a little concerning. And also you look at it, medical foods and infant formula went off on their own. What's the justification for that? Is it different science? Is it a different regulatory paradigm? Why separate that out from food and dietary supplements? Why take medical food and infant formula and put them in their own little bucket?
All right, let's talk about something that actually has real world business implications for a second. Drug preclusion, this provision in the law that if something has been approved first as a drug, or it was essentially studied first as a drug and it meets certain criteria, it can't be sold in a supplement. Bob, walk us through the criteria of drug preclusion.
Well, the first is, you said it's approved as a drug or a biologic. You look for the date of the NDA or the BLA. It's pretty simple. It's publicly available. The second element is, help me out, Dan, if I get them wrong, authorized for investigation, significant clinical investigations have occurred, and those significant clinical investigations have been made public. Those are the three elements. When those three elements are satisfied, that article would be excluded if it was not before then first marketed in or as a dietary supplement, a dietary ingredient. As is an important word. But if you think about the way that works, for some reason, the law doesn't require this. It just has those three elements. FDA's never promulgated regulations under it. They really haven't come out with a guidance document that pertains to it. Here's the situation. Someone could get an effective IND. That's the date for authorization. That's what FDA decided the date is for the race to market. Someone could get an authorized IND today. Tomorrow, everyone in this room could work together and put a dietary ingredient legally on the market. We could be on the market for 3 years. Somebody conducts significant clinical investigations under that IND. 3 years from now. 3 years from then, they publish it. Guess what? Because that was the IND date was a day before we were legally in the food supply, our ingredient is now retroactively excluded from the definition of a dietary supplement. It defies logic. That cannot be Congress's intent with authorized for investigation or how they intended 201FF3B to be interpreted and applied. You could compare that to 301LL, which I think was 2007 maybe?
FDA, yeah. Yeah.
So 301LL is the analogous part of the statute for food, and it just has significant clinical investigations and made public. They got rid of the authorized for. And when you look at the authorized for, that's an IND date. That's a secret date. You don't know that until you know it. Only the people that hold the IND and people they tell know it, and FDA. You look at NMN.
Let's move on to
yeah,
NMM real quick.
yeah.
It's okay.
Sure.
We only have 30.
I can just go, yeah.
Dan, so this is not hypothetical talk. We have all kinds of ingredient suppliers here selling all kinds of ingredients, and FDA in recent years has said certain ingredients that have been on the market for either a couple of years or decades even are suddenly excluded from the definition of a dietary supplement. You actually, your organization, Natural Products Association, sued FDA. In 1 minute, what happened?
And Bob was our counsel, by the way. Simply put, on NAC, we tried to relieve it administratively. We did the citizens petition thing and thought we made some good points, but the agency's like, that's nice, thanks, but no thanks. So the only way to get their attention at that point was go, look, this is clearly not, if this is the hill you want to die on, this is NAC now. This is an agency that loves to say, hey, if it's not a public health issue, leave us alone. We don't have the resources, we don't have the time. So you're talking about an amino acid where it wasn't a public health issue. There was no other outstanding issues there. We weren't stepping over any bodies. So the only way to get their attention was to bring a case. And that brought them to the table, and we were able to secure guidance for the first time that actually talked about the use of the drug preclusion and having things walk in both worlds. We wanted them to write a reg as relief. They said they can't, they couldn't bind that. I think they can, however, we effectively got what we want. NAC came back to the market. The bigger problem was what happened outside of FDA.
Okay, we'll stick with you just for a second because there's real business implications when FDA makes a determination, because I know Amazon stopped selling NAC for quite a long time until you guys reached a resolution with FDA. What was at stake there in terms of sales? Can you give us a ballpark of how that really affected the market?
My understanding from one of the bigger sellers was that was about a $15 million hit was when it came off.
Okay. Bob, let's move on to yet another ingredient, more recently NMM, which FDA had received an ingredient notification, had acknowledged that, a new dietary ingredient notification. Later, they changed their minds and determined that it was excluded. What do you make of that?
Sure, that's where I was going before. And when an NDIN comes into the agency, there's a 10-day evaluation by the chemist staff. That's the first thing they do. They make sure that the notification's complete, and they make sure that the article fits the definition of a dietary ingredient. The other thing they do is they send an email over to CEDAR with the name of the ingredient and all the synonyms. And then CEDAR looks to see if there's an IND for it. Now, they looked for all the synonyms, they missed a synonym. They gave it back to ODSP that it was good to go. ODSP sent the AKL letter. The owner of the IND said, wait a second, we have an IND. They sent a letter to FDA, and FDA said, oh my goodness, we missed it. If FDA can miss it, what chance do you all have of knowing the date that you're up against the race for?
Well, they didn't just, here's what happened though, Bob. They didn't just say, hey, we have an IND. They went back into clinicaltrials.gov because they cited a substantial clinical trial at the time. And that clinical trial mentioned a dietary supplement containing NMN, not MIB 626.
Yeah.
So it got even worse.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've had NAC, we had NMN, we had some other ingredient called vinpocetine. They said that was excluded. I don't think they ever made a final determination. That's just like pending in the somewhere at FDA. I'm sure in some closet somewhere. I think, I don't know, maybe it's in the basement. But this just keeps happening. So is the solution Congress? Is the solution just sue FDA every time this comes up if you have standing to do it? What's the solution?
You know, it could be we have to sue them. It could be we put their back against the wall, or maybe they step back and say we misinterpreted 201FF3B, and you know it's not the super secret IND date that's the date for the race to market. Maybe it's their interpretation and application of the statute that's wrong. I wouldn't expect they do that. They don't often go back like that. Otherwise, you know, folks want to crack open Deshay. Careful what you ask for. But if you're going to look at something, that's one of the parts of the statute we should look at.
What do you say about?
Well, we've been saying for years at NPA that the most important thing, everyone's talking about all these other Deshay reforms, like Bob said. We said the thing that needs to change is we have to get clarity on this. With this Congress right now, that will not happen until there is a lawsuit that deals with this. We didn't, NAC, we actually never got it into court and started really, you know, calling balls and strikes on what it means and what FDA's definition is. FDA holds firm on their position because it's never been litigated, it's never been challenged. So I think you've got to do, the legal aspect has to take precedent, and then if that doesn't work out, that interpretation doesn't work out in the appropriate way, then you can go to Congress and go, look, we have no other recourse.
You know, the part about it is you don't have standing or venue to sue FDA until you're in peril.
Right.
Like somebody actually has to get their product seized or taken from them. We have to have, it's hard to get into court, and they do that deliberately.
And they kill markets in the meanwhile.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen that with CBD, we saw that with NAC, and I think you're seeing a lot of it with NMN.
Right. Let's move on to enforcement for a second. So a lot of the companies here have ingredients. I don't know how many new ingredients that are being launched this week. Hopefully there's quite a few. At the FDA, I think it's 30 to 55 new dietary ingredient notifications that the FDA gets a year on average. I've heard estimates like over 100,000 products in the market. I don't think anybody really knows. But the point is this, is the number of required submissions versus the number of submissions. There's a big gap. I think most people would agree. So why does FDA not enforce on this, or does it enforce on this, Bob, and under what circumstances?
You know, it does when there's an illness or injury, or they can point to an ingredient that clearly isn't a dietary ingredient, DMHA, or you know, pick one. Where it gets murky is 414. If you have a new dietary ingredient, you can either, you know, the NDIN route or present in the food supply in a form unchemically altered. And you can do the present in the food supply in a form unchemically altered through a GRAS determination and putting your ingredient in the food supply. So FDA a few years ago actually wrote that they can't presume that someone hasn't done that before they take an enforcement action. So they're basically stuck waiting for an actual adulteration to happen. They're actually stuck until there's a situation where there's a tangible risk of illness or injury.
That doesn't sound like a good game plan to me.
You're right.
I mean, so basically what they're saying is, like you said, we have to wait until there's a body in the street before we enforce against a company. Why can't they go to the company and say, show me your evidence that this is not a new dietary ingredient, or show me your evidence that this is exempt, that this is not in the food supply in a form chemically altered, it's a grandfathered ingredient, whatever. Why can't they do that? Can't they do that?
They can, and they can do it in different situations. So maybe one of the more effective ways to do it would be with an import alert for NDIs.
Dan, what are your thoughts on it real quick?
I mean, it's disappointing at best, Josh, because you said it right. And Bob's partner, Kevin Bell, got a letter on the heels of Carnicin when we were asking for Carnicin enforcement from knockoffs that were being made from E. coli. And FDA said, well, it looks like it's the same, though we've never seen the specs. So on one hand, they go, hey, we don't like enforcing this part of the statute, but on the other hand, and they give the reasons of resources and public health, but on the other hand, look where they're making problems. Look at the things they're kicking out of the NDI. NMN, they wouldn't look at NDIs on CBD. So it's like, what's the message?
Amazon, growing concerns about counterfeit supplement products on Amazon, growing concerns about quality on Amazon. Amazon's such a big force now in the supplement space. We know that, there's a number of companies that have identified their products being sold as counterfeits, notified the Food and Drug Administration. It seems like the FDA says thank you very much, and there's no follow-up in terms of action. Do they feel, Bob, that it's either not a public health concern or it's a trade matter? In other words, it's a basically like a competitive issue, and it's not their job to get involved.
Again, that's where I'm sort of confused. I don't know how it couldn't be an agency priority. On one hand, they say we don't have enough resources to enforce everything. We can't go after all the bad players. Fine, but what you can do is you can make the space, that's that part of the space occupied by good players. You can support that part of the space and let them force the bad players out. When you sit there as an agency that regulates dietary supplements, you're aware that there are counterfeits that are priced at a point where they're not being made correctly, they don't have the right ingredients, and you don't contribute resources to go after that or work with other federal partners to do that. You're denying that good space. You're denying that part of the market that does the right thing and will work with you to amplify your enforcement resources to force the bad players out. So I don't understand. Again, I'm confused how that couldn't be a priority for the agency.
I mean, we dealt with it firsthand recently with both Now Foods and Fungi Perfecti. Fungi found an undeclared food allergen, and the agency didn't move on a recall, which is the number one recall at the agency. So I agree with everything Bob says, and I'll echo, I think they have some fear for a variety of reasons of really addressing anything with Amazon. I think they kind of let them do what they're going to do, and that may present some problems.
What's the relationship between, I think I see Steve Shapiro maybe in the audience. I don't have my glasses on. I'm kind of half blind, but what's the relationship between FDA and industry today? And it's when I talk to people that have been in the business a long time, they say, there's been a lot of animosity over the years. It comes and goes. Like, what's the relationship today between the agency and industry?
You want me to go for it? Okay.
Sure.
I mean, I guess some people accuse me of contributing to the animosity, Josh. I would never do that. But I think the problem is they won't have a conversation. I think, when I was at the agency, I think there were a lot of disagreements with what I had to say, but I was here. It was a priority. You've got to you have to talk to industry. You may not agree, but I think there's a little too much echo chamber. I mean, every one of these issues we're seeing on the drug preclusion is the same again and again and again. It's like, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. There's got to be engagement, and there hasn't been.
Meaningful engagement. You can't just show up and say nothing.
Yeah.
Bob, I want to get your opinion real quick, but I just want to mention so I'm with Informa and Natural Products Insight, and we have invited the FDA for a number of years to supply side. When Dan was there, he spoke. Steve Tave was the director. He came out at least once and spoke a number of times in recent years. They've declined our invitations. We did not send an invitation this year. That's on me, but they've declined it in recent years. I just figured I was going to get the same response. Blame me for being lazy, but it is important to have them here, and we'll try to get them here next year to participate in something like this. Bob, go ahead.
Well, I think that when they do show up, it has to be a meaningful exchange.
Yeah.
When you're an agency official and you go to speak, there's always a reservation. You don't want to provide guidance from the stage. But at the same time, you should talk about what you're doing and how you're doing it and inform regulated industry how they can do it right or do it better. And sometimes I feel like that's not happening the last few years.
Also, I think kind of going back to your last question, why wouldn't the agency want to know, if you have companies like Now Foods out there that they've done 27 tests and turned them over to the agency, why wouldn't you want to have as much contact with someone like that?
I want to try to open up to at least a question or two before we do that, Bob, just like 3 bullet points, if pieces of, I know it's not legal advice, but pieces of advice for folks as it relates to FDA. You're a former acting and deputy director over there at ODSP. Like, what advice would you give them?
I'm sorry, what advice?
What would you give industry as it relates to working with FDA today?
I would say invest in compliance up front or pay for enforcement later when you're talking to FDA. Have your reasonable basis, expectation for safety, for the regulatory status of your ingredients. Make sure you have paper, documents to show it. FDA's mantra is if it's not documented, it didn't happen. When FDA inspectors or officials reach out, a lot of times they will tell you you have to do something or give them something or ask you questions that they have no right to demand or ask. You have to know how to politely push back and ask why or what document they need. You know, when the inspectors show up, they're there to do a job, but they have to follow their own rules. They can't have one set of rules for themselves and hold you to a second set. So you have to know how to tactfully push back and ask questions. By and large, the folks that work at FDA all want to do the right thing. They're good, they're committed people, but we all work for someone.
Dan, 1 minute. What advice would you give them?
Everyone right now, and some may take this the wrong way, but fine. People are putting their resources in the wrong place, frankly speaking. It's time to fight. The industry is under attack at a federal level and at a state level, and everyone's just walking around the show floor going, everything's great. Everything's not great. They just put an ID check in New York yesterday. No one's talking about that. You've got this issue here on screen where you can see the agency is trying to trigger a better form of vitamin D3 off the market by going back in time to October 1978. There was no definition of dietary supplements in October 78. So when you look at these things, there is a practice to go at the FDA to go, the industry, you're here now, we want you to be here. And so that's great. We can go up and the trade show pays the bills for you, and we want that to keep going, but you've got to have the avenues on Capitol Hill with FDA, with all forms of government, and the only way those stay open is if folks show up in DC, folks get involved, and there needs to be more of that, because right now folks are like, oh, someone else will take care of it.
I'll go a step further. Everybody in here should be a member of a trade organization. There's no more time for free riders. There's no more time for not. If we don't act now, dietary supplements in the next 5, 10, 20 years, we're going to be working in a different field, because they're going to change everything. They're going to reinvent the book. So join an organization, pay your dues, get your voice heard. Maybe you couldn't go that far, but I'll say it. There should be no more free riders.
Oh, Jenna, we probably have time for a question, if somebody has a question. There's a gentleman up here. Front of the row.
Time for two.
Hey, so I'm just curious how you see the relationship between the FDA and how the FTC's new regulations around wellness claims that were introduced in December. How do you think that's actually going to play out? Is the FDA going to kind of be backing up the FTC? Like, how is that whole thing, do you imagine, playing out? It's very new, and I don't think anybody knows exactly where it's going to go. And I was really excited to come here today just to ask this question to get some insights.
Ironically, Bob's firm knows. They just signed on as a partner Rich Cleveland, who headed up FTC and the health products action there for 30 years. So they know. I mean, the quick read is FTC and FDA have always looked at the world differently, right? When it comes to claims, FDA's focused on the disease claims. FTC's, dug in on substantiation. That doesn't appear to be changing.
No, it doesn't. And if you think about it, I said it earlier, both commissioners, Califf and Jones, talked about claims and that FDA should do more to make sure that these claims are true. There's something moving there. There's some kind of current there, whether they're going to work with FTC. Maybe we'll see some misbranding, false and misleading charges coming out for some claims. Who knows? I do think one thing that confuses things, structure function claims, but for dietary supplements and maybe some conventional foods for their nutritional value. If you make a structure function claim and you're not one of those things, you're an unapproved new drug. And I don't know always that the Federal Trade Commission appreciates that dietary supplements can make structure function claims that doesn't equate to a disease claim. There's a difference there. And even in their notice of penalties that they put out in April, the back sheet of paper that told all the 4 claims, if you look, the second one is natural wellness claims and the third one is disease claims. Maybe they're trying to get themselves a little bit of space between saying that every structure function claim needs an RCT, which is ridiculous.
All right, we have 1 minute and 25 seconds.
Lightning
24 seconds. You have 30 seconds for closing remarks, sir.
This is a big issue. This is the biggest issue. We've come so far. GMPs are set. Claims the agency, I think it's been fairly robust since DeShay. AERs is fantastic. But this last piece for innovation, we're going on 30 years and we still don't have clarity on innovation, and it's getting worse. And so that's something everyone needs to think about. And we can't grow without innovating. So this is the time for everyone to get involved.
On its face, drug preclusion, the statute's a great idea. It preserves the incentive for pharma, it preserves the rights and the incentive for the dietary supplement industry. I just think its interpretation and application is asinine.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you 36 seconds. Thank you very much.